just catching our breath from week one of all the NFL action. Today, I'm going to take you through, as I said, a couple of players who have had a good start, had a good week one, and a potential, comeback players after a bit of adversity, or not for the comeback player of the year necessarily, just guys that starting to come back into the fold after a little bit of time in the wilderness. Then a couple of breakout players, and then we'll look at some offensive tackles. Now, it sounds boring, but it's actually pretty important because these teams spend massively high picks on these players, and they sort of get lost in the weeds. If you don't follow it week to week or year to year, you forget how these guys are going until they reach superstar status or until they fade out of the league completely. So I'll just take you through a couple of guys and how they are developing. I've got PFF open here on the screen, so this is on YouTube if you want to follow along on the screen. And I know that yesterday's episode was a little hard to read. The screen was perhaps a bit small, so I've tried to improve that today. But we're starting with Ramondre Stevenson. So this is a potential for a comeback. So what's his career look like so far? This is year 4 for Ramondre. First year, he had 600 yards, and he was a bit part player, but showed a lot of potential. Then he went 1,000 yards the next year, and we thought, wow, this guy's on. He became a fantasy darling. People who picked him up were very proud of themselves because he's not an early pick. Ramondre was taken in the 4th round in 2021. Last year was a disaster for him. He was 4 yards per carry, which was below what he usually was, but his usage was far less, just 619 yards. But then on the weekend, goodness me, out of nowhere, 120 yards and a TD. So maybe some improved offensive line play, maybe some improved scheming, some fresh ideas. Maybe Gerard Mayo wants to get him involved more, but it was 25 carries for 120 yards at 4.8, and he scored a touchdown. He only scored 4 last year. So that was a good start for Ramondre. He's a guy that, when he's on, he's really exciting. It was sort of like a Damian Pierce year last year where he just went from being this player that we're all excited about to someone who just didn't produce much. But maybe the change up there has helped him. So that's Ramondre. Who have we got next? A bit of a comeback, Derek Carr. Now, I bring this up because, yes, it's only one game, but at the end of last year, he got on a run. He got on a roll, Derek. And look at this. We've got weeks 15, 16, 17, 18, where collectively, he threw, 12 touchdowns and only 1 interception, and his passer rating was through the roof. That's that NFL column there, 134, 106, 111, 145. That's how he finished the year. And we were pretty dismissive of that last year on the show. We said, their season's done, or I know they were sort of in contention later, but it seemed like there was a little bit of junk time in that. But maybe, just maybe, he's becoming unlocked at New Orleans because we know he had a great start, 200 yards exactly, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, and a passer rating of 142, and he was just dominant against Carolina. Yes, it was Carolina. Yes, it's 1 week, but Derek showed something. So maybe that late season form of last year was worth paying attention to if this continues. Next, we've got Sam Darnold. Now, he's hardly played snaps in the last couple of years. He was at Carolina for about a third of a season before they got rid of him for Mayfield, and then he drifted to San Francisco, played 1.5 games last year, and now he's finally got a crack to be a starter with JJ McCarthy injury, and it was a good start. Yes, he threw a pick, but he was very solid outside of that, and he guided them to an easy win over the Giants. So Derek and Sam Darnold, they're a couple of guys just to watch for a potential comeback. This isn't a comeback. This is an outbreak candidate, I should say. Alec Pierce, Indianapolis Colts. He's in his 3rd year. He was a former 2nd-round draft pick, so they spent a bit of capital on him. And he's just been a bit part long throw, downfield sort of receiver at the moment. A couple of years with 500-plus yards and 2 touchdowns. And then he broke out on the weekend. That's his biggest game, 125 yards, 1 touchdown. Now, it's an interesting one because, yes, it's big numbers, but there were 2 very, very big receptions there, and he wasn't necessarily getting targeted more. He got targeted only 3 times on the weekend, caught all of them, and went for 125 yards. So if you're looking at him as a fantasy option, I still wouldn't go there. They've got Pittman and they've got Downs when he's fit, who probably receive more. But he's worth a stash on a dynasty roster, and I have stashed him for the last couple of years, so it was nice to finally see that little breakout on the weekend. But yeah, so 3 targets, and you could see last year he was getting anywhere between 1 and 7 targets in his games. Averages about 4 targets a game last year. So it's not like he was targeted more. He just happened to have a nice day where it all came together. Another breakout, and this I think is a genuine breakout, depending on how Mark Andrews progresses, it was different to see Andrews in his role last week. He did a bit more blocking, far less receiving, and Isaiah Likely was clearly the number one target, even over Zay Flowers. He was targeted 12 times for 9 receptions, 111 yards, and a TD. And when he's been on the field, when he's had a crack in the last few years, he's been quite productive, Isaiah Likely. You can see towards the end of last year when Andrews was out, 7 targets, 6 targets for 83 and 70, and he scored 5 touchdowns in the last 5 weeks of last season. So a bit like Derek Carr, he caught fire at the end of last year. And now, I mean, he could genuinely be the tight end one there. He could be outranking Mark Andrews for the rest of this year because he's just that good. And he almost caught that second touchdown, obviously, as we know, that was just a toe on the line. So that's Isaiah Likely. And this guy's been on everyone's radar for a number of years because he was fantastic in his first preseason. And since then, we all thought, man, he's got something. And then when he's gone in regular season games in his bit part roles, he's been very good. So it's great to see him as the number one. Very, very quickly, we'll just finish with some tackles. Now, again, not the most exciting stuff, but these guys were all taken in the first round, the 5 guys that I'm going to highlight. The first one, or the first 2, were the 2023 draft. That was Paris Johnson for Arizona. Now, they have needed some development on their O-line. Last year, PFF grade of 60, he was just okay. You know, it was probably what you expect for a first-year tackle. Did allow 42 pressures and 8 sacks. 8 sacks is a fair few to allow. On the weekend, yes, he allowed 1 sack, but it was his only pressure, and he looked a little better. He did look a little better, and it was his highest PFF grade by far of any game in his career. So, promising start for Paris Johnson, the number 6 pick from 2023, a couple of years ago. Darnell Wright. Now, he's just started his second year as well. He was picked 4 picks after Paris Johnson. Wright plays for Chicago, and he had a pretty similar year last year to Paris Johnson in his first year. 51 pressures allowed, 7 sacks, PFF rating of 62. On the weekend, however, 56 offensive snaps, not a single pressure allowed. Not a single pressure allowed. And that's the first time in his career that he's done that. So the first clean game from Darnell Wright, and it came in week 1 of his second year. So that's good. Now let's go back a further year. Let's go back to the 2022 draft. You can see I've got it here. And the 3 guys I want to talk about are Ikem Ekwonu. I've always struggled with that. Evan Neal and Charles Cross. So Ekwonu was taken for the Panthers at pick 6. Neal, pick 7 for the Giants. And Cross, pick 9 for the Seahawks. We'll do them in order. So Icky, he has played a couple of years now. Okay years, solid years. Allowed 11 sacks last year, though. So his PFF grade was higher, but he allowed a lot of sacks and 44 pressures. So he actually went backwards a little bit last year, in my opinion. Efficiency of 96%. That sounds good. It's actually not that great. You want to be 98s, 99s for an effective tackle. This year, he didn't start well. He didn't have a good week 1. All right, and this is the major problem with Carolina, or one of their major problems, is that they just can't protect Bryce Young. He got sacked another 4 times on the weekend. Ekwonu didn't allow 1 directly, but he did allow 4 pressures, and it all contributes. So he didn't start well. 59 snaps for 4 pressures is not what you want from your third-year, first-round left tackle. It's a problem. So he's not developing. Speaking of a guy who is just not developing at all, Evan Neal's been a complete disaster for the Giants. And I don't mean to keep beating up on these guys, but this is sort of, it's when you go back and look at these key draft picks over the last few years, and then, like I said, it's hard to track their efficiency if you're not really into it. Then you look a bit deeper and you think, oh, well, their starting right tackle that they put all this investment into is not even playing at the moment. And when he did play for the last 2 years, he was a total disaster. I mean, in just a small handful of games, he wasn't playing the full year. He allowed 39 pressures, 29 pressures in his first 2 years. PFF grade of 44 and 39. That's rock bottom of the league. And now he went missing in off-season. They didn't know where he was. He has some mystery injury. He's not playing at the moment. So that was their number 7 pick from a couple of years ago. That explains some of the Giants' struggles in protecting Daniel Jones, and therefore some of his struggles in throwing the ball. It's not all on his ability. It's on the lack of protection as well, and the lack of weapons. Now he's got neighbours, though. And it also explains a bit of the Bryce Young struggle as well, with their big draft pick in Ekwonu not coming on yet. But at least he's playing. And finally, a bit of good news for Seattle. Let's have a look at this guy, Charles Cross. Now, he's been slightly better than the other two, I think, from his first 2 years. Yes, he did allow 48 and 42 pressures, 7 and 6 sacks in his first 2 years, but there were some positive signs, and those positive signs manifested themselves in a fantastic performance in week 1. He was brilliant as far as the tackle was concerned. 67 snaps, he had a PFF grade of 94.8, didn't allow a single pressure. Now, he did that a couple of times in his first year. In one game where he played about half, one game where he played the whole game, he didn't allow any pressures. He also had some disastrous days where he allowed 9 and a couple of sacks. So it was a great start for Charles Cross. You normally start to see year 3. That's when you can really tell, are these guys going to make it or not? Because it's a tough position to play when you're coming up against superstars on the defensive edge. Big boys. It's a big shock coming from college, but year 3, you really want to start seeing something, and Charles Cross, that was a perfect way to start the year. So he's shown flashes. Out of those 3 early tackles in the 2022 draft that were taken, Charles Cross for Seattle, he seems to be the best, and he started this year well. So that's where we're at. That was a bit nerdy. The last 2 days have been a bit nerdy, but hey, we're NFL nerds. That's why you listen to this every single day. Thanks for listening. We'll see you tomorrow.